Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. My name's Kate Mackenzie, and I'm Knowledge Transfer Manager at AHDB Dairy. And tonight we're going to have a webinar on robotic herd signals. So our presenter this evening is Owen Atkinson of Dairy Veterinary Consultancy. And Owen is a vet and a CowSignals Master trainer. He's got extensive experience of all types of dairy farms in the UK and overseas, and he also provides training to dairy farmers, vets, dairy professionals, also using a lot of his own research into cow behaviour and how environment affects their health and well-being. So we're in very good hands this evening. And Owen and a series of other CowSignals trainers are doing a UK-wide delivery of CowSignals workshops during June and July. So if after this webinar you'd like to attend one of these on-farm events, you can find a full list of locations and dates on our AHDB Dairy events page. So if you just Google AHDB Dairy events and CowSignals, you'll see the full list. And I think we've got about 11 or 12 locations that are still going to be happening over June and July. So there's a really good proportion of the UK covered. This evening we've got about 130 people booked on, so really good turnout. So thank you very much for joining. How things are going to run this evening, we're going to have about half an hour for Owen to run through his presentation, and then we're going to have time for comments and questions at the end. So everyone's going to be muted through the webinar, but if you'd like to ask a question, you can type it into the question box. And you'll find this on the little control panel on the right hand side of your screens. So if you click on the little the tab that says questions, you can type it in there, and I'll be looking at those as we go through. And so after the presentation, we'll run through the questions and we'll aim to finish on or before 8 o'clock. We're also going to do a few poll questions this evening, just to make things a bit more interactive and a bit more interesting. So these are going to come up on the screen during the presentation, and each person sat at home is able to click on an answer using your mouse. So we'll let you know when these come up. We've got a few questions throughout the presentation that Owen's going to give. So I'm going to be working in the background to make sure that things run as smooth as possible, hoping that we're not going to encounter any technical difficulties. If we do, then please bear with us, but everything should go fine. So without further delay, I'm delighted to introduce Owen. So Owen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. I wondered if you might be able to start us off with a bit of an introduction about yourself, please.
Hi, thanks Kate, thanks for that intro. I think you've done quite a good introduction already. Have faith, Kate. You know, this is about robots. We don't have technical difficulties. That's one of the first things I guess for robot farmers is have faith in the technology. Oops, there we are. I was just trying to put myself, move the slide forward. So yeah, this is me, Owen Atkinson. As Kate says, I'm a vet. I'm not a vet specialising particularly in robots, but I've got an interest in them. I think robot systems are fascinating on lots of different levels, and I'm happy to share that with you. My aim is to make lives better for cows and the people who care for them. That is my professional goal, and I hope by sharing some of my thoughts this evening, I hope I will be able to help you do that as well. Here's the first poll question. So that's a little bit about myself, and Kate's done an introduction. It'd be just quite nice for me to learn a little bit about who's listening. So there's the question, what best describes your situation? Which box do you fit into? Are you a dairy farmer already working with robots? Are you a dairy farmer considering investing in robots? Are you another dairy farmer? Are you a farm advisor and included that? If you're a vet, include yourself in that bracket, or none of the above. Kate, do you launch now? Yep.
Sorry, yeah, we've had about 70% in, just coming up to 80%. So you just click on the screen. Okie doke, right. Won't be a second, just going to close that now and share that one. Can you see that, Owen? So 53%.
I can actually, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got some good knowledge actually amongst the audience by the sounds of it, because over half of you are already milking robots, which is great, because I'd quite like this to be a bit of a learning experience for me as well. So by that, I mean, when we have a discussion at the end, if you've got some valuable points or questions, that'd be really, really welcomed. Now, in my opinion, the key to successful robotic milking can be summarized really by voluntary attendance. Good voluntary attendance by the cows for milking, then that is a very important part of it. And what are the success factors for that? So in my mind, the design of the shed has to be the first thing. The cows themselves, certain cows may not, particularly if they're used to different milking systems and they go onto a robot system, may not suit the system. But also the behaviour of the cows, which I think you can, to a large extent, through management, adapt. I'll talk about that later on. And the organisation of your work, and I include in that how you group your cows. So those, I would say, are the success factors. And you notice that the type of robot isn't, in my mind, it isn't in there, you know, whether it's a Lely or a Delaval or a Forward, you know, I don't think that's the important bit. I think those three things are the important bit. And certainly, if you get the success factors right, then you shouldn't be having, well, you should have as few lame cows as possible, because they are a disaster for robot farms. They're a disaster for all farms, but particularly robot farms. And you will have no overcrowding or overstocking. That reduces stress in its own right, and all that drives free cow traffic. Now, sort of pulling this together from a CowSignals point of view, CowSignals, anyone who's familiar with CowSignals concept, talks about the basic needs of the cow, and they are feed, water, light, air, rest, space, and finally health. Health, the 6 things around the edge of that diamond all help contribute to good health, but good health is a basic need in its own right. For example, control of infectious disease, reducing BVD infection, for example, which even if you get those 6 things right around the outside of that diamond, if you've got BVD or uncontrolled other infectious diseases raging through your herd, or even at a low level through your herd, then you're not going to meet the needs of the cows. So that's the basic CowSignals needs. And I'm going to concentrate quite a lot on the one at the bottom right hand there, space, because that is particularly important for robot farms. Now, if you consider why space is so important, if you look at this picture of cows grazing outside, you might think of some things in your own mind why space is important. So, for example, if you've got a lot of space, cows tend to be cleaner because it dilutes or it spreads out the area that the muck can be spread out in. So that can affect foot health, for example. It reduces the risk of digital dermatitis. And that's just one example. Space also allows cows to get away from stressful situations. So if you have a shy cow, she can usually get away from the more dominant cows. So there's a couple of reasons why space are important. I'll touch on a few more as we go on. If we look at this bird's eye view of these 2 diagrams of 2 sheds, the one on the left of your screen is a 2-row design, 32 cubicles, 32 cows, so it's stocked 1 cow per cubicle, and the one on the right hand side of your screen is a 3-row design, and it's 60 cows with 60 cubicles. So again, it's stocked 1-to-1. The cubicle dimensions are the same in each diagram, but the passageways are different dimensions, and also because we've got a 3-row design, then it obviously affects the overall space of the cows. And if we just look at an example, so I've put a blue circle, you should see a blue circle around a cow on the right hand shed at the top there. And if we think this cow is wanting to go to feed, then she's got this cow to get past, she's got that cow to get past, she's got that cow to get past, and then when she gets close to the feed, she's got all these cows to deal with. So it restricts, when we restrict space, we restrict freedom of choice. And when we restrict freedom of choice, what cows tend to do is they become in CowSignals language known as waiting cows. A waiting cow, in essence, is a cow that isn't either standing at the feed fence eating or lying in a cubicle chewing her cud, because essentially that's how cows will choose to spend their day, doing one of those two things: lying down and usually cudding when they're lying down, or standing and eating. And you look at cows outside, they're going to be doing one of those two things for the vast majority of their day. When we restrict space, we end up with what's called waiting cows, like that cow with the blue circle around her. She's waiting, in this case, to go to the feed fence. And what do waiting cows do? They clog up the passageways. And when that happens, then we're in a vicious circle situation, because she then becomes another cow that might be preventing other cows to do what they want to do, either return to a cubicle or go to the feed fence. So it's a vicious circle. You can see that when you restrict space, you end up with a lot of crowding in the passageways, and that restricts space even further. Conversely, if we look at the shed on the left, where there's a lot more space, because there's more space, you're more likely to see freedom of expression of bulling, for example. So that blue circle is around 2 cows that are bulling. And if we look at this cow here, the grey cow that's circled in blue, let's presume she's just had a feed and now she's returning to a cubicle to lie down and chew her cud. And because there's more space and the passageways aren't clogged up, she can do that. So if we imagine these two sheds and we stuck a robot at the end of each of those sheds, the voluntary visits for the shed on the left, where there's less crowding, are going to be higher than the voluntary visits for the shed on the right. So simple stuff. How much space, though, is enough space? These are recommended space allowances for free cow traffic. In my opinion, it's not just my opinion, it's backed up by a little bit of science somewhere, but I know this is an area where AHDB, Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, AHDB are researching at the moment, I think, how much space is enough space. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. With the University of Nottingham, with their robotic herd systems, looking at the different space allowances and stocking rates.
And I think it's research that we need, because what I've put in front of you there on the screen is not particularly evidence-based, a lot of it, and it's nice to be able to get an evidence base. But yeah, those are the space allowances, and I'm going to show you a picture to see what it looks like in real life. So here's a nice cubicle shed. I like this cubicle shed. I'm going to keep returning to it because I like it. I also like jerseys. That's a guilty secret of mine. This picture is taken. It's in a robotic shed. I am standing, taking this picture on the roof above the robots at the end of the shed. It's a 6-row design, feeding passages on either end. So when I'm talking about the space in front of the robots, I'm talking the 6 meters here, not 5 meters, mind, 6 meters. That's my recommended. And I'm not including the area where the water trough is. There isn't a water trough on this wall actually in front of you here, but there is here. So not including the water trough, I would like to see 6 meters preferably between the robot and the next obstacle. When we look at the feed passage, so here we are, this feed passage, I want to see a 5-meter feed passage ideally. And when we look at the passages between cubicles, I want to see a 3-meter feed passage, 3-meter passage there. And then the crossovers, I like to see a 5-meter. That can include where the water troughs are. And then no more than 20 cubicles between crossovers. I think there's 16 by memory here. There might be 20. I'd have to count them up, but no more than a bank of 20 between crossovers. And finally, I'm going to return to this one. Head-to-heads, I like to see a minimum of 5.5 meters. That's 17 feet between curb to curb, and that allows enough space here for bob space between the cows. It's the space between the brisket boards, which I'll return to in a minute. So that, in my mind, is what enough space looks like. And that would be okay for a Holstein herd. This is a Jersey herd. Now, if we provide that kind of space using those kind of dimensions, my question on the next poll is this: is how much total shed space in meters squared per cow is a good target to have Be interested to know your thoughts on this. So shall I read those out, Kate? Is it A, 5 meters squared per cow, B, 7.5 meters squared per cow, C, 10 meters squared per cow, or D, 12.5 meters squared per cow? So what's the minimum meter squared per cow which you think is a nice amount to have?
Great, we've just got about 8% in. We'll just give it a few more seconds if anyone else would like to vote.
And I think, Kate, isn't this one of the questions that is actually being asked by that new research at Nottingham?
I think so. Sorry, you've caught me off. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I think it is. Just
Check.
talking to some of the people involved.
Okay, right. Share that one.
Okay, so if I can see that right, is it 68% of saying 10 meters squared?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would agree with that. That's my minimum. And when you see, it's almost a magic number, because when you look at sheds that are working well and you do the calculation, it is that it's 10 meters squared per cow. That's what tends to be good. I don't know if there's any extra benefits going larger than that. I haven't actually come across a shed that is providing 12.5 meters squared per cow, but there's certainly lots of sheds in operation that are providing 7.5 meters squared per cow. In my experience of doing the measurements, actually 7.5 meters squared per cow is probably the typical amount of space that cows are allowed in sheds. So if we go back to my favourite shed again, this 132 jerseys in a 3-row design shed, and it's got the similar dimensions that I described, then doing the calculation, actually there's 9.7 meters squared per cow. Bearing in mind these are jerseys, so they're smaller cows. So that is particularly generous, and I'm suggesting that 10 meters squared per cow is round about right, even for Holsteins. And you can see, what are the cows doing? There's a few cows here waiting to go into robots or just coming out. There's a lot of cows lying down and chewing their cud. Here's a waiting cow, but she's probably just about to step into that cubicle. And then the other cows are standing and eating. And there's a cow here that's using a brush. There's a cow here that's nicely laid out asleep. And that is why I like this shed, because there are no waiting cows. And the voluntary attendance at the robots in this shed just isn't a problem. The feed space, though, because it's a 3-row design, is actually 0.6 meters per cow, which might arguably be a limiting factor, but I'd be interested to know your thoughts on that. Now, if we compare it to a shed, which is just another shed, but not particularly unusual, it's a 2-row design, central feed passage, head-to-head cubicles here, passage on the outside, feed passage here. Then actually the space in this shed is 7.6 meters squared per cow. I'm not including the feed passage, by the way. I'm just measuring the dimensions here of available space to cows. And this is what I commonly see. That shed's not overstocked in the sense that it's 1 cow per cubicle. It's a 2-row design, so it could be worse. 3-row designs tend to have more compromised space depending on how wide the pasture areas are. So I would suggest measure your shed, see how much space you've got per cow, see what it's like. And advisors and vets who are listening in as well, do it as a little exercise. It's so simple and it's interesting, and see what you think. Interesting.
Sorry, Owen, there was a comment from Ben, one of the farmers online, saying that he's got about 11.5 meters per cow.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The shed looks quite empty. So is that, I mean, that's a pretty good thing, isn't it? Or what do you think?
I'd like that. Sort of well, I mean, those sheds that tend to have that little bit more space, it's only that extra critical 2.5 meters I'm suggesting. They look more empty because you haven't got the waiting cows. Like this shed here, I suggest if it had a little bit more space, would look a lot more empty because you don't get these cows here. They'd all be either lined up eating or lying down chewing their cud. So yeah, 11.5 meters, lovely, brilliant, Ben.
And one other thing, whilst we're on the topic, Owen, may as well, one from Kaylee. Would the same measurements apply if the cows have got grazing space as well as?
Yeah, okay. Now that's a good question. The configuration of the shed is also important, and well, actually, it might lead on to the next couple of slides. Because I talk about how do you create extra space. It's great if you can build a brand new shed and provide 10 meters square per cow like the cubicle shed that I like, that I've shown you, but what can we do in real life to create extra space? And by allowing outside space, allowing loafing areas outside, for example, would be one way to do that. What I would say though is if you're thinking of going to a robot farm and you're not already, and you've got a shed like this, don't just think, oh, I'll stick 2 robots at the end of the shed here. Create an extension, put 5 meters in front of the robots, and put a couple of robots on a robot on either end, because it won't work for you, and you'll be disappointed because you won't get that voluntary. You won't get that voluntary attendance that you need to make a robot farm work. But let me have a look, Kate. Actually, I think my next couple of slides are how do you create extra space. No, it's not. I'll come on to it in a minute. Don't worry, I'm not far off.
Thank you.
This is another robot farm. I'm standing on top of the robot again. It's one robot. It's 60 cows in this shed. But this was an example of a farm that had actually converted from a conventional milking system to a robot system, and they realized that to do it they needed to totally reconfigure their cubicles. They ripped out what they had before. If by memory, it was actually they had 4 banks of cubicles in here. I just can't remember how it was configured, but they ripped out all the cubicles and just kept the frame of the shed up and started afresh. So you can see that they've got the wide passageways. They made sure that they had this extra space between the head-to-head cows. So 6 foot really, I think it's 6 foot between the 2 brisket locators. And that means that you get less cubicle rejection, and also cows lie straight in those cubicles, which keeps the beds cleaner. And then also putting a very generous 4 foot in front of these cubicles here. So again, similar, just to get better cubicle acceptance and cows lying straight, which keeps the beds cleaner. They also created an additional feed area here with the white arrow just outside, because they realized that although they had plenty of space in the shed itself, they were concerned that the amount of feed space was going to be a bit limited. There is a criticism of this shed, and I would say that the cows are a little bit dirty, if I'm going to be critical. And in retrospect, it might have been, given that they were doing a lot of work inside the shed, it might have been a good idea to have put, although we've got a slatted area in front of the robots which you can't see out of the frame, it might have been a good idea to have dug a channel, a slatted channel, so that the passageways were drier. You can see how much standing water there is on this passageway here, and I think that I know it caused digital dermatitis on this farm, and that would be something that I think if they could have their time again, they would have spent that a little bit of extra money when they did the shed conversion by putting a slatted passage in, just a channel to keep the shed drier. So there we are. That's an adaptation. This is a CowSignals kind of mantra. Always look and ask what the cows are telling you. And to me, these cows are telling me, I wish I was able to ask the question in another poll question, but I can't. I just have to say what I think they're telling me. They're telling me that they have not got enough space in front of the robots. There's a lot of crowding around here, and that will be reducing voluntary visits. And that's because they've got limited space here. So the robots are under the platform here. This, you might recognize it, some of you. This is Nottingham University's old robot farm, and they've just built a new one. One of their frustrations again was the amount of lying water that lay in this shed, and that was causing a lot of mastitis because of the damp atmosphere. I'd love to see their new shed. I've not seen it yet. This was the bit I promised I'd get to. What adaptations can you make to create extra space? And I keep it quite simple. The first adaptation is remove cows from the shed. So if you have a shed and you've got 7.5 meters squared per cow, you need to be getting cows out of that shed. You need to be reducing the number of cows in that shed in one way or another. And if you're doing that, it kind of makes sense to take some cubicles out as well. And particularly if you can get rid of dead ends or create more crossovers, because it all creates space. Even if you can't reconfigure it to get the passages as wide as you'd like, it all helps to create that extra space. Then there is the creating outside loafing area. I don't know if that was the suggestion, Kate, from the person who asked the question. Was that part of the question about creating some outside space using grazing as well?
I guess, yeah, it comes into, I mean, it's more if the herd was grazing with the robots, but the loafing area is obviously another aspect.
Okay, well, let's have some questions at the end about how to combine robots with grazing, because I think it's a tricky one. And if you have got an outside loafing area, it kind of makes sense if you can create a feeding area out there as well, because it takes cows out. It takes cows out of the shed and away from the passageways. And here's an example. This is not a robot farm. This is the Holtons, and they are they're one of the new AHDB strategic dairy farms. So they're having an open day on Tuesday, if anyone's in the area, Cheshire area. That's Tom and Karen Holton. And several years ago, they knew they had to reconfigure their sheds to create enough space really inside the sheds. And they did it by creating outside feeding areas, which work really well for them. This is another adaptation. It's not a robot farm. Again, it's not a robot farm, but it's an old design shed. The farmer's aware there wasn't enough lunch space in front of the cubicles, and these old cubicles, the kennels used to have bordered walls here. Simply removing them has really sort of helped with cubicle comfort. And again, this here. So they're all good things. It's just some examples of farms that have adapted what they've got to improve cow comfort and get cows lying down more, which means it takes them out of the passageways, less waiting cows, therefore better cow flow, free cow traffic.
Owen, whilst you're on that slide quickly, please, if that's okay. Keith has just asked on the removal of cows, if you do reduce your stocking rates, what are the financial incentives, or would you like to go that into a bit more detail at the end about that one?
I think I've got a little bit of yeah, I do say something about the finances, but just in simple terms, I always like to think of milk out of the shed, not necessarily milk per cow, milk per shed. And I know it sounds glib, but when I've sort of been successful, and I have been successful in some occasions, trying to persuade farms to reduce their stocking density, the milk either stays the same in the shed or it goes up with less cows. There's going to be a cut-off point, obviously. You take more and more cows out of the shed, you're going to get a point when the milk, the extra milk that's produced by the remaining cows doesn't change. But often the milk yield will go up, and that will pay for the lower stocking density. I'll return to that question now towards the end. It's a good question. I'd like though to, Kate, if I can, just move on to look at some cow behaviour stuff. I'm only going to be talking for 30 minutes. I can see I've done 25 already. So let's just have a look at some of the cow behaviour stuff. I'm going to take you back to my nice shed again. I took you through very briefly a research project that I was involved with a few years ago, and it was looking at cow behaviour in this particular shed. What we did is we set up a time-lapse camera, and it was set to take a photograph every 10 seconds, and it's a high resolution camera, so you could see right at the back of the shed by blowing up the photos. And you can see this cow here in the bottom right. She was marked. There was a few cows that were marked with fluorescent strips, and what that meant was that we could follow the behaviour, or I could follow the behaviour of those marked cows wherever they were, all the way through a 24-hour period. The camera was, it wasn't just a GoPro, it was quite a sophisticated kind of time-lapse setup, because it needed to work in different light conditions, and it needed to have a high resolution, so we could see this is that cow here blown up, well, what she was doing at the end of the shed. So that was the project, and through that I was able to map the time budgets of the cows in this shed, and this is the findings. So how does a cow spend her day in a robot shed? So in this case, the cows I studied, which were not very many, but just a few of the cows in that shed, were lying down for just over 12 hours a day. They were feeding for about 5 hours a day. They were loafing in one way or another for just over 4 hours a day. They spent nearly an hour a day doing social activity, which I'll describe in a minute, and then 20 to 30 minutes milking and 20 minutes drinking. So that was the total amount of time in a 24-hour period. This table here, I don't expect you to absorb the information in the short time it's up, but it shows the number of bouts for each activity. So we just look at lying, for example. My cow was spending 12.5 or 12.3 hours lying down, but that was in 6 bouts, and the average median length of time of each bout was just over 2 hours. Okay, and if we look at the feeding, for example, she spent 5 hours in total feeding over 9 bouts, and the median length of time for an individual feed was 34 minutes. I think the longest was 45 minutes, which was after the first feed in the morning, but the median was 34 minutes. So that just gave us a bit of an indication of how cows were spending their time. And I would suggest that's a good kind of, those figures that we got in this shed were good targets to have. In particular, this little and often feeding, the 9 feeding bouts, I think that's, if you look at cows grazing outside, when studies have been done on that, they will typically have 9 or 10 feeding bouts during the day. Most sheds, again, looking at other studies, cows will only have 4 or 5 feeding bouts during the day. And what that does is it affects the rumen health. It's far better. The cows have been adapted really to have little and often feeds throughout the day. So if you can have 9 feeding bouts per day in your cows, you're doing very well. And that shed design and space is what's going to help you have that, as well as having free access to feed and regular push-ups. What's difficult though in real life is knowing what your cows are achieving, and these, I get quite excited about new technologies for measuring cow behavior, the different accelerometers and so on that exist, and some of them are getting quite sophisticated now, so you can start probing into how your cows are behaving, how many feeding bouts they have, what the total feeding time is, etc., and then work towards these targets. Okay, this is my last poll question. It's just a bit of a random question really, but it's for a general interest, and that is, how much time do you think cows spend asleep? So from that study that they spend or should spend 12 hours or more lying down, how much time do they spend asleep? And is it A, they don't ever sleep, B, about 20 minutes, C, about 2 hours, or D, about 6 hours? And that's in a 24-hour period.
Okay, we're just up to 70%. Just get the last few in. Last few seconds to vote. Okie doke. So we'll share that as about 2 hours coming out top.
Okay. The correct answer, I think you showed it very briefly, didn't you? The correct answer actually is 20 minutes. So that's a pub quiz question, that. If ever you are doing a pub quiz, throw it in. That's the correct answer. So the cows do sleep. No one said they didn't sleep, and that's good because you should see cows sleep. They catnap, and I guess that's because they're prey animals. You know, they've evolved not to switch off entirely in case they get eaten by a lion or a tiger. But yeah, apparently they sleep for about 20 minutes. And in the study that I described, the one in that Jersey herd, my cows, they slept for slightly more than 20 minutes. They slept for about 40 minutes, I could work out. It's quite difficult to know when they were fully asleep or not, but you know, I was sort of assuming they were asleep when they were flat out, or their heads were tight on their flanks. And I'd be interested to know, and I don't know if there's any studies on this either, whether cows that are less stressed, more relaxed, sleep for longer, because it would kind of make sense if they did. Because their relaxation levels are higher, and just they're not, you know, they don't worry about being prey animals. So I just wonder whether the cows that are less stressed sleep for longer. But anyway, that's the answer. 20 minutes in little 5 or 10-minute cat naps throughout the day. Okay, I said I'd look at the importance of socializing. Cows, you may be surprised to learn about that. I don't know that in that study of the robot farm, the Jerseys, they were spending almost an hour socializing, and that was a mixture of licking each other, like the two cows in, or that like the cow in the picture here, but it was predominantly standing. You'll see this in a shed or even in outside. You'll see cows standing head to head doing head weaving. They don't butt each other. If you imagine two stags that are trying to fight for dominance, you know, they really go at it, don't they? That's why they have their horns and they bang heads. What the cows will do to establish a hierarchy is they'll stand head to head, and they'll do quite a lot of head bobbing. That's probably as good a way to describe it. And you should see that. I think if you've got enough space for your cows to allow that socialization, you'll see that. And that's how they establish their hierarchy. And why is that important? And why is it particularly important in a robot farm? Well, establishing a social hierarchy and having that freedom of socialization and enough space to do that will improve expression of heat and bulling behavior. So that will improve your fertility straight away. It has a direct effect on your bottom line. But I think more important than that, it is so that cows can establish what their hierarchy is and do that in a stress-free way as possible. And the good robot sheds or the good robot farms, they are an oasis of calm. You walk amongst the cows and they're not stressed by humans because they tend to have more, they tend to be more used to that. I think there's the potential for robot farms to really reduce stress compared to conventional milking, because it's a stressful thing when we take cows and put them in a tight collection yard twice a day, which is what happens during normal milking, and cows in robot farms don't do that. So that oasis of calm is a result, I believe, of allowing enough space for socialization and a steady hierarchy to develop. And all of that is what improves your voluntary visits by having a low hierarchical stress. It won't be that there won't be boss cows in that shed. It's just that they know where the cows know where their place is. I keep saying the same thing, but space is so important for that. But also a good grouping strategy. So if we just have a look at what a good grouping strategy or some of the considerations for grouping strategy are, I think most people would agree that for robot farms, a stable group of about 45 to 65 cows, i.e. one robot, is probably best from the cow's point of view. And that's because cows they're very, well, again, other research has shown that cows can recognize around about 40 to 65 other cows. So that kind of stable group of that kind of number allows each cow to know where she is, and you can have a kind of a very structured hierarchy. Now that might be best for the cows, but in actual fact, it might not be best for your labor efficiency and access to the cows. So that this is when you might increase your group size to 2 robots or to 3 robots. So we're looking now at 120 or 180 cows in a group. My thoughts are that if you have a group with more than 3 robots, so in one group, so we've got more than 180 cows, I worry not only from the point of view that how stable, how is that group hierarchy working, and could it be increasing stress, but also it surely gets very difficult from a cow management point of view, from a human point of view, to find a cow. You've got a cow to serve or a cow to dry off, and finding those cows in that size of group gets harder. You can use shedding, automatic shedding, I guess, but from a human point of view, I think that going above 3 robots or 180 cows gets more complicated. I think also people would agree that avoiding groups of cows that are all at the same stage of lactation. In other words, don't have a highs and a lows. You want that group of cows that are using one robot to be at different stages of lactation, and that will optimize the use of the robot, because the ones that are higher yielding earlier in lactation are going to be having more voluntary visits, and the cows that are getting towards drying off will have less voluntary visits, and that means that the robot has a little bit more downtime. So that's a general kind of thought. I think most people would agree with that. And then finally, in terms of grouping strategy, just avoid moving groups, i.e. stick them in a group and leave them in that group until you dry them off. Don't move them around, and take time in that first 2 weeks of lactation in particular to set the cow's routine. By that I mean that after that 2 weeks, it's very difficult to change her behavior. So if she gets used to being brought up to the robot, then that might be a difficult habit to break. The final area I just want to look at before we stop for questions is looking at special needs cows. So by that I mean the sick cow, the fresh cow, the lame cow, a recovering cow, and also possibly bulling cows or cows under treatment. And every farm's going to have them. You need to think about where you're going to put them and how you manage them in a robot system. This diagram here is from the CowSignals robot book. Some of you who've got robot farms may be familiar with this already, and it's a kind of typical kind of robot design that is used a lot in Holland, for example, I think in Canada as well, which has a dedicated area behind the robot. So this is your main herd here in a 6-row design, so like the Jersey shed that I showed you. These are robots here, so milking robot 1, milking robot 2, and then they have dedicated areas behind the robots for that special needs group, which might include fresh cows, a straw yard area, and possibly cows here under treatment or other reasons to keep them separate. So this is an example of that. This is a UK farm, and this is a fresh cow group behind the robots that are here, and the main cows are the other side of the robot. And it just allows you to have a particular attention for these cows, and is likely, because it's less cows in the group, it's likely to increase their own voluntary visits to the robots, because they can get easy access without having to think about getting past other cows. And this is in the same farm, looking at the other side of the passageway. So this is in front of another robot, or behind another robot, sorry. And this is the arrangement they have for the calving areas. They have the dry cows are elsewhere in a different building, but when they come very close to calving, they're put in this calving pen, or at the point of calving ideally. They calve, and then they're immediately put into the straw yard where they've got access to the robot. So that's just an example there. This is a Dutch farm showing a similar kind of thing, a space behind the robot, which is a nice, well, it's a sand bed. So it needs a bit of management in terms of collecting dung. Those kind of sand yards do take a bit of management, but nice to have from a cow comfort point of view. This is another farm. It's a UK farm where they did it in a slightly different way. It's a bigger farm. I can't just remember. I think there's 5 robots in total, or maybe 6 on this farm. And they did decide to have a dedicated straw yard group. But the downside of this, it's great from a sort of cow comfort point of view. They've got a straw yard group for a special needs group, which should include the fresh carved cows. But the downside is that you've got a group change, because cows are being moved in and out of this group. And that is not so good for hierarchy stress. So that was just a little bit of a discussion on what to do with those special needs cows. There needs to be some kind of plan there. I'm just finishing off now, I guess returning to that question that was asked earlier, Kate, about what's the optimum number of, what's the payback by reducing stocking rate. I think that was the gist of the question.
Yeah, that's right.
So this isn't necessarily just applicable to robot farms, but it's a sort of these are figures I've put together, but it's kind of me creating an argument, if you like, for space. So if we look at, say, these are UK averages really. Average farm, dairy farm, cows are producing 7,500 litres per year. Mastitis rate is 70%, lameness rate is 75%, cull rate 28%. And these are realistic targets that the top 10% certainly will be achieving. So 9,000 litres per year, lower mastitis rate, lower lameness rate, lower culling rate. And so there's the difference. And this is my benefit per cow that I would put based on these figures, margin litres, and then cost of case for mastitis, cost of case for lameness, cost of case for a forced cull. So you can see that from going from sort of UK average, UK average to top 10%, you've got a benefit per cow of nearly about £468. And a lot of farms, I always use sort of a benchmark kind of figure, rough and ready figure, how much money does a cow produce per year? £500. Well, we can see that that's where it is, £500. That can be the difference between sort of, average and best. So that's a bit of stuff. That's the potential. Looking at it a slightly different way, if we look at throwing up a new shed, and it's very easy for me to say because I'm an advisor and I'm not the person who has to put the money down, but typical cubicle house new builds are going to cost between £1,000 to £2,800 per cow space. Now that the £1,000 would be the probably a wooden kennel, and it wouldn't include the slurry management or slurry handling. The £2,800 you're going to get a bit of slurry kind of storage and so on, I think, included in that. It's a big range, but that's the kind of broad brush figure that I know of that new builds are costing, not including the milking, not including the robots, or if it's a robot farm, or the milking parlour if it's a conventional farm. But over 20 years, that shed is going to be costing this kind of region, so £50 to £140 per cow per year. I haven't included interest, which arguably I should. But if we say it's the top end, 140 cows per year, so this is, we're spending £2,800 per cow space, costing £140 per year per cow over 20 years. Then if we can achieve an additional 500 litres, regardless of any extra health benefits we might see, then that would yield at 28 pence per litre, £140 extra milk sales. You might be saying, oh, well, hold on, why have I not included there the extra feed costs, etc.? I am suggesting, in fact, I'll strongly suggest that these extra litres, 500 litres of extra milk, come as a bonus, if you like, without extra feed costs, and that's largely through better utilisation of feed. So that's why I've put the full 28 pence per litre in there in the calculation rather than the margin of 16 pence. But that's my argument. That's my simple argument that, investing in space, and it doesn't have to be a new build, but investing in space gives a payback. And it's quite easy to justify. But not only that, that investment is either through extra milk, like I've shown, or fewer health problems. Typically, it's both. And it's not just money. So if you consider that the average sick cow, farmers, you tell me, how much time do you spend on your sick cows, and how much do you spend on the rest of the herd that just look after themselves? The average sick cow takes the same amount of labour or time, possibly, as 40 healthy cows in your herd. So that's the payback. That's my argument. Come back at me if you don't agree. I'll just point into the direction of a couple of resources that I find useful, and if you're not familiar with them, you might find them useful as well. So first of all, 2 books in the CowSignals range, one that is dedicated to robotic milking, another one that is dedicated to building design, but not necessarily just for robots. In addition to that, AHDB have a dairy housing best practice guide, which is great for different dimension guides and etc. And finally, have a look at this website, which is a Canadian website, dairylogics.com. This is specializing in cow shed design for robot farms. So if you're thinking about converting, or you just want some ideas, just have a look at dairylogics.com and see what they've got. There's lots of different pictures there of different designs. So there we are. That takes me to the end of my very, very extended 30 minutes. Sorry, Kate.
That's okay. Thank you, Owen.
Open for questions.
We've got a couple of questions come through, and just to remind people that if there's any information here that you wanted to look back on for figures, or just to have another look, it's going to be on our AHDB Dairy YouTube channel, along with all of our other webinars from the past few years. So Owen, to kick us off, we've had a few questions about foot baths, things like positioning, whether they should be close to the hang on a second, about positioning of those, and how they can not hinder flow.
Yeah,
and
brilliant.
The exit, or what you
I had a little section, because on my special needs bit, I did have some slides on how to deal with foot bathing in robot farms, because I thought it deserved some attention, and I took the slides out because I knew I was going to go over time. So I'm glad someone's asked the question. It's really difficult. What do you do? I think there's 4 options. One is to have foot baths immediately on the exit of the robots, and the danger of that is it reduces voluntary visits, and you get a lot of splash potentially on the teats when they haven't properly sealed. Another option is to have an automatic wash spray, and I think Lely make one, probably other people do as well, where the cow's actually in the robot and they get a jet of foot bath solution on the back of the heels while they're in the robot. From what I can see, they're kind of okay, but my worry about that is a little bit like the other automatic jet wash type foot baths, such as the Vink one. And that is that they only get the heel, they only get the skin at the heel, they don't do the skin at the front. And I know most digital dermatitis is at the heel, it's on the back of the feet, but my experience is that some farms that have those systems, they end up getting necrotic toes, and they get the necrotic toes because the digital dermatitis, when it does occur at the front, doesn't get tackled, and then that leads to a necrotic toe. That's a different subject altogether, but just take my word for it, it does. So that's my worry about those systems. The third option is to have a foot bath in a crossover that is permanently down there. If you remember back to the shed that I showed you, that was a conversion to a robot. It was the single robot shed. They'd made extra wide passageways, and I said that my criticism of the shed was that it was a little bit wet. If you remember that slide, that's what they had. They had a permanent foot bath in the crossover, and I think they took it out. And that's because when you do your calculations of the cows that are going through that foot bath, it gets quite a lot of cow traffic in the crossover. So it becomes very mucky very quickly because cows muck in it. So that's the downside of that. And then the fourth option, which is my preferred option, which is why I left it till last, is to have a foot bath in the crossover. And I'm sorry, almost I took the picture out because it's difficult to describe, but it's a narrow foot bath in the crossover, which cows don't have access to all the time, but you make the effort, the job, if you like, of running the cows through that foot bath. And the way to do that is to shut the cows in one half of the shed, and then put the feed out and have them walking through that narrow foot bath one at a time in a single file as they go to the feed passage. So you have to do that, and you have to repeat it 3 or 4 times per week as a particular job. And I think that's my preferred option, but it's tricky. And again, I'm open to other suggestions.
Well, we've had a comment in from Jill, and she says that they've got a curved foot bath on the exit of each robot, and water's changed in there every day, formalin twice a week, and this basically prevents the cows from stopping in the bath and blocking the exit.
Okay. How dirty does it get though? Because that's unless it's a cow count kind of bath or something where it's on a timer, so it is emptying and filling. Because if you think about a typical robot is going to have, let's say, well, do a rough calculation, 200 visits per day. Am I right? 60 cows going through 2.5 times each. Not quite 200 visits per day, but a lot of visits per day. If we stick to the rule of thumb, which I quite like with foot baths, which is no more than 1 cow passage per litre of solution, I just wonder how dirty those baths get. So I don't know what happens in Jill's situation, whether she empties it on a regular basis or what, I don't know. How do you prevent the contamination?
Okay, well, I guess it's like the curved shape that, I mean, it's the same with beef units with their curved corrals and things, isn't it? It kind of helps with the flow that she was suggesting.
Yeah, I can see that. And the space to put, you see, in most robots, you don't have a lot of space to put a long foot bath, so you get limited foot dunks as well. So yeah, I've not seen that option. So yeah, good to hear.
Okay. No, it sounds really interesting. And Ben's asked a little bit about free access and how have you got any thoughts on guided flow systems?
Yeah, I have. Sorry. I don't like them. I'm sorry, I don't like them. I like free access, and I like it to be genuine free access. So I'm not an expert in this area in the different systems that are around, but I know there are ideas about trying to reduce the number of cows that farmers have to fetch up by making cows go through the robot to get to feed, or making cows go to the robot to get from feed back to the beds. Those are the 2 different options. And unless someone can show me evidence otherwise, they reduce the number of feeding bouts, and that's not a good thing. If you remember, we want lots and lots of little feeding bouts throughout the day for rumen health and for feed efficiency. So if cows are not having the required voluntary attendance that you want, or you're having to fetch up a lot of cows, just think, well, why? Because that's not normal. Is there a lot of lame cows and you're not dealing with that, or is it a shed that doesn't have free cow flow because it's overcrowded? I'm kind of not a fan of using those kind of incentives to get cows to go to the robot, i.e. making them go through the robot or go through that robot area before getting to the feed. I just don't think it's the way forward. That's my view.
Okay, so based on that, would you maybe remove the guided flow and trial it? It's just what Ben's asked as a bit
Yeah.
of a follow-up.
Yeah, I don't know, Ben, what kind of system you've got, but yes, I would try not having your guided flow, and if you're not getting the voluntary visits that you want, then kind of look at, well, what else can you do to improve those voluntary visits, Ben? I mean, you're in a better position to answer that question yourself, really, because you know what kind of space you've got in your shed and you know what levels of lameness you've got, but you should expect to achieve good voluntary visits without that guided flow.
Now, Owen, it might be
Sorry.
interesting. Oh, sorry, go on.
Well, no, even if it means fetching a few more cows in the short term while your cows become trained, perhaps.
Okay, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt there.
No.
I was just going to say it might be quite useful for people to be able to see the footpath fourth option that you mentioned. I did have a couple of poll questions just to finish up. Do you think it would be, is it easy for you to find that diagram now to put it up on your screen whilst I do last couple of poll questions just on how people have found the webinar, or would you rather that you look at it
sure. No,
afterwards?
I think I just skipped the slide, so I think it should be easy. Yeah, I'll find it.
Okie doke. Right, whilst you have a look, I'm just going to do these last couple of questions just to see how people have found the webinar this evening. So if you could just let us know how relevant this webinar has been for your business, that'd just be really nice feedback for us, please. Just got about 80% in now, thank you. Okie doke, that's great. So looks like it's been helpful for everyone. So glad. If there is anything further that you'd like information on, no problem to contact myself, Kate Mackenzie, or look up Owen as well and be able to signpost you some things that maybe we haven't covered this evening. And then finally, before I come on to your last slide, Owen, just whether you think that things that we've covered tonight is going to be relevant to do something for your business. They're just coming up to 70%. Last few seconds, 80%. That's brilliant, thank you. So yeah, it's been useful maybe for changes that you might do on farm. So I'll quickly put that away now. So back on to you then, Owen. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. That's really good feedback, everyone. Thank you very much. Yeah, this was what I was talking about, this kind of thing. So it's a nice long foot bath, which means you've got plenty of dunks. It's not a permanent, it's narrow, which means you can get a low volume, which is a little bit cheaper to fill. I've got some, okay, let's pull it apart as well. Not pull it apart, but let's suggest some better things. Foot baths are better if you step in and step out rather than have a slope. Cows generally prefer stepping in over a curb. So in other words, you know, if you'd had a curb here and a curb here and then filled it to 12 centimeters or 15 centimeters deep, then that would have been probably an easier footpath to make, and because you could sit it on top of your slats, there's no reason to you just sit it on top of your slats, and it would have been, cows accept it very well. They'd step in and step out. But yeah, let's not criticize too much because it's probably still a great footpath. But you see, you've got the length, which means you get, if you're more than 3.5 meters, you're likely to get over 2 foot dunks. So 3 meters would give you 2 foot dunks per foot. 3.5 meters and 4 meters, you're going to get 3 foot dunks for a lot of the feet. So that's good. Yeah, it's narrow, which means you can use a smaller volume. So if you've got a 3.5 meter, I don't know what that length is, it might be 4 meters, but let's say it's 50 centimeters wide or 60 centimeters wide and 10 centimeters deep, then what's that going to be? 400 times 60 times 10. I don't know whatever that works out to be. It's probably about 250 liters, and that's kind of a reasonable. It's not going to be too expensive to fill with chemical. So that's what I'm talking about, that kind of design. And you have one cow passage then before emptying it and starting again the next time you foot bath, if that makes sense.
Yep.
There's other stuff to consider as well. Don't get too hung up on the foot baths. So the floors are important. I'm a fan of slats, good slats that have got grip. And then this early identification, prompt treatment of cows, which means you need to have a system for finding your lame cows early, and you need to have really good facilities that makes it dead easy for you to whip a cow in a crush, lift its feet up, get it treated as soon as possible. And that's true for controlling digital dermatitis as much as it is for the other lameness lesions as well. Don't get me started on lameness, Kate. We'll be here for another hour.
That's great. Was that your only slide on foot bath sewing? Was there anything else?
It was, I'm afraid. Yeah, no, it was. It was.
Okay. No, that's brilliant. Thank you for going into the extra detail on that. I know that foot bathing and lameness is a big question, isn't it, around robotic herd? So it's nice to go into a bit of extra detail on it. Okie doke. Right, we haven't got any other questions to go to just at the moment, and it's 8 o'clock, so we'll wrap there. But if you do think of anything, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much for all of your participation this evening. And Owen, thanks very much for all of your expertise and your time as well. It's been a really good webinar and a nice one, I think, that people can look back on as well on the YouTube channel. So it's great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Okie doke, so we'll end it all there then, folks. And like I said, if you'd like to go to any of the on-farm CowSignals meetings, then go onto our events page and you can book a place there. And hopefully we'll catch up with you again on another webinar or another event. So thank you. Good night, everyone.